Why did a woman who finally found a place to belong saddle her horse before dawn and disappear into the winter mountains without saying goodbye? The abandoned mining town groaned in the wind as Cole stepped from behind a weathered building. Snow crunched beneath his boots. Across the empty street, Ruby stood frozen, her gloved hand gripping a worn leather satchel. Then another rider appeared through the blowing snow and slowly dismounted. Ruby's face changed the moment she saw him, and Cole realized he was already too late to stop whatever had followed her there. Before we ride any farther into this story, tell me where you're watching from today. The autumn of 1887 arrived early in the foothills of Montana. By the first week of October, frost was already whitening the grass around Cedar Bluff Ranch before sunrise. The cottonwoods along the creek had turned gold. Every morning, cold wind came down from the mountains and rattled the loose boards of the barn. Cole Bennett stood beside the corral fence with a coffee mug warming his hands and watched another cowboy ride away. The young man lifted 2 fingers from his hat. "Sorry, Mr. Bennett. Ain't staying for winter." Cole nodded. "Safe travels." The rider turned his horse toward the valley road and disappeared into the morning fog. That made 4 men gone in less than 3 weeks. Nobody liked winter in this part of Montana. The snow came early. The roads vanished. Cattle died. Men got trapped miles from help. Cole couldn't blame them. Still, he stared at the empty bunkhouse and felt the familiar weight settle across his shoulders. Everything around Cedar Bluff Ranch seemed to need fixing. The north fence leaned. The roof over the feed shed leaked. Half the horses needed new shoes. And now there was nobody left to cook except Hank Doyle, which was a problem for everyone, especially because Hank cooked like a man who hated food. 3 nights later, a pot of burned beans sat untouched in the middle of the table. The ranch hands poked at their plates. One man quietly slid his portion to the ranch dog. The dog sniffed it and walked away. Hank looked offended. "They ain't that bad." Nobody answered. The front door opened. A gust of cold air entered with Mrs. Eleanor Finch. The elderly widow carried a basket covered by a cloth. "Well," she said, "looks like a funeral in here." A few men chuckled. Mrs. Finch set her basket down and looked around. "Cole, I found your cook." Cole looked up. "You found what?" "A cook." "I didn't ask for one." "Yes, you did. Last Sunday, after Hank nearly poisoned the church social." Laughter rolled around the room. Even Hank laughed at that. Mrs. Finch stepped aside. A woman entered quietly behind her. She was younger than Cole expected, maybe 27, dark-skinned, slim, wearing a brown traveling coat that had seen many miles. She carried 1 canvas bag, nothing more. Her eyes moved across the room once, not nervous, not timid, just careful. "This is Ruby Walker," Mrs. Finch said. Ruby gave a small nod. No smile, no speech, nothing. The room fell silent. Cole stood. "You cook?" "Yes, sir." Her voice was calm, low. That was all she said. Mrs. Finch folded her arms. She worked for freight camps, railroad crews, wagon trains, been cooking all over the territory. Cole studied her. "Can you start tomorrow?" "Yes, sir." Again. Only 3 words. Mrs. Finch smiled. "Wonderful. Then my work here is done." She left before anyone could argue. Ruby remained standing beside the door. Cole noticed her boots. Worn. Recently repaired. A person who traveled a lot learned how to take care of boots. "Kitchen's yours," he said. "Thank you." That was the longest conversation they had all week. Ruby appeared before dawn every morning. The ranch hands never saw her arrive, yet somehow breakfast was always ready. Biscuits, eggs, bacon, sometimes apple preserves, real coffee, not the bitter sludge Hank usually made. The first morning, nobody spoke. They simply ate. The second morning, someone asked for seconds. By the end of the week, laughter had returned to the table. Stories returned. Arguments returned. Life returned. The ranch felt different, warmer somehow, even though the weather kept getting colder. Ruby never joined them. She would set the food out, refill coffee cups, then disappear. When supper ended, she cleaned the kitchen alone. By the time everyone went to bed, the lamps were out and she was gone. It became a mystery. Nobody knew where she spent her evenings. One night, Cole returned late from checking fences near the creek. The moon hung low above the pines. The air smelled like snow. His horse moved quietly past the barn. Then he noticed someone sitting beside the far wall. Ruby. She sat on an overturned bucket, not moving, not speaking, just staring at something in her hands. Cole almost called out, then stopped. Moonlight reflected off a piece of metal. A badge. Old. Worn. The kind carried by freight company employees years earlier. Ruby's thumb moved slowly across its surface. For a moment, her face changed. The distant look disappeared. Something heavier replaced it. Something sad. Then a board creaked beneath Cole's boot. Ruby's head snapped up. Their eyes met. Immediately, she slipped the badge into her coat pocket. Too fast, too practiced, as if she'd done it 100 times before. "Sorry," Cole said. "Didn't mean to startle you." "It's all right." She stood. The moment was gone. Whatever had been on her face disappeared behind the same quiet expression she always wore. "You should get inside," she said. "Temperature's dropping." Cole glanced toward the mountains. Clouds were gathering above the dark peaks, heavy clouds, winter clouds. When he looked back, Ruby was already walking toward the house, alone. A woman carrying secrets. And for the first time since she'd arrived at Cedar Bluff Ranch, Cole Bennett found himself wondering where she had come from, and why someone who worked so hard to remain invisible still carried that old badge everywhere she went. Far above the ranch, snow began falling across the highest ridges. The season's first storm was coming, and before long, it would trap both of them under the same roof. Neither one knew it yet. But everything was about to change. The storm arrived 2 days later. By noon, the mountains had vanished behind a wall of white. Snow swept across the foothills in long, twisting sheets. The wind rattled every window of the main house and drove drifts against the barn doors. Hank Doyle stood on the porch pulling his coat tighter. "That's going to be a bad one." Cole glanced toward the dark sky. It already is. The ranch hands spent the afternoon securing feed, water barrels, and wagons. By sunset, visibility had fallen to less than 50 yards. No one would be leaving Cedar Bluff Ranch that night. Inside the kitchen, warmth pushed back the cold. Ruby moved quietly between the stove and the work table. A pot of beef stew simmered over the fire. Fresh bread cooled beneath a cloth. The smell filled the house. For a few hours, the storm felt far away. Then a crash echoed from outside. Every head turned. Another crash followed, louder. Cole was already moving. The south horse shed. He grabbed his coat and rushed into the storm. By the time he reached the corral, snow was hitting his face like handfuls of gravel. One side of the shed roof had partially collapsed. The horses inside were panicking. Cole fought through the blowing snow toward the entrance. Then he saw another figure already there. Ruby. She was leading one frightened mare into the open. "What are you doing out here?" Cole shouted. "Helping." The answer vanished into the wind. Together they worked fast. One horse, then another, then another. The animals trembled as they were moved into the larger stable. A loose beam suddenly shifted above them. Ruby pushed a gate closed at the same moment the timber dropped. She jumped back. Too late. The rough edge scraped across her forearm. Not deep, but enough. Cole reached her seconds later. Blood spotted the sleeve of her coat. "You're hurt. I'm fine." She wasn't. The cold was already making her hands stiff. Cole took the lead rope from her, inside. Ruby looked ready to argue. Then another blast of wind nearly knocked both of them sideways. She gave a short nod. Neither spoke during the walk back. The storm seemed even louder now. The house welcomed them with firelight and warmth. Most of the ranch hands had already gone upstairs. Only the crackling stove remained awake. Cole found the medical tin in the pantry. Ruby sat at the kitchen table. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, she looked uncertain. Not frightened, just tired. Very tired. Cole poured warm water into a basin. "You should have stayed inside. You would have gone alone." Still, she almost smiled. Almost. He carefully cleaned the scrape. The room stayed quiet except for the wind outside. After a while, Ruby spoke. "My father used to hate snow." Cole looked up. It was the first personal thing she had ever volunteered. "He from Montana?" She shook her head. "Missouri." A pause. "We traveled west when I was little." Her eyes drifted toward the window. "We crossed rivers, wagon roads, places that don't even have names anymore." Cole waited. She seemed surprised by her own words, as if she hadn't planned on saying them. "My mother always carried coffee beans in her apron pocket." A faint smile touched her face. Said every place felt less strange if it smelled like coffee. The smile disappeared as quickly as it came. Silence settled again. Not uncomfortable, just quiet. The kind of quiet that existed between two people who no longer felt like strangers. The fire popped softly. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, time slowed. Cole finished wrapping her arm. "There." Ruby looked down at the clean bandage. "Thank you." Their eyes met. Neither looked away. For several seconds, the wind seemed farther away. The fire seemed softer. The room smaller. Ruby stood first. Maybe because staying seated felt dangerous. Maybe because she understood the moment before either of them did. "I should go." Cole rose too. She turned toward the hallway, then hesitated. Only one step away. Something in him moved before he could think through it. "Ruby." She stopped. When she looked back, neither of them spoke. There wasn't a speech. There wasn't a confession. Just a long second filled with everything neither had been saying. Cole closed the distance, slowly, giving her every chance to step away. She didn't. The kiss was brief, gentle, gone almost as soon as it happened. Yet when they separated, the room no longer felt the same. Neither did they. Ruby lowered her eyes first. Her hand tightened around the edge of her coat. Then she quietly walked down the hallway, without another word. Cole remained beside the kitchen table long after she disappeared. The fire continued burning. The storm continued howling. Sleep never came easily that night. The next morning, Ruby avoided him. She served breakfast, refilled coffee cups, collected plates. But whenever Cole entered a room, she seemed to find a reason to leave it. By afternoon, the distance between them felt wider than the entire ranch. That same afternoon, 20 miles away in town, a rider arrived through the snow. His dark coat carried the dust of long travel. He tied his horse outside the general store and stepped inside. A few minutes later, he emerged holding a folded piece of paper. Then he crossed the street toward the livery stable. "Looking for someone?" the stable owner asked. The stranger nodded. "A woman." He reached into his pocket. A worn metal badge caught the light, the same kind Ruby had hidden beside the barn. The man's expression hardened. "Her name is Ruby Walker." Back at Cedar Bluff Ranch, Cole stood near the corral fence as evening settled across the valley. The storm clouds were finally breaking. In the fading light, he saw a lone rider moving through town below. Something about the figure felt wrong, and somewhere deep inside, a feeling he couldn't explain began to grow. The storm had passed. But trouble was riding toward Cedar Bluff Ranch. Fast. The snow began melting 3 days after the storm. Water dripped steadily from the barn roofs. Mud returned to the wagon tracks. Thin sunlight broke through the clouds and settled over the valley. From a distance, Cedar Bluff Ranch looked peaceful. It wasn't. Something had shifted. Ruby still worked in the kitchen before dawn. She still baked bread, brewed coffee, and prepared meals for the ranch hands. But she moved differently now, more careful, more distant. Whenever Cole entered a room, she seemed to find something else that needed her attention. A pot to clean, a sack of flour to move, a reason to leave. Cole noticed. He said nothing. One morning, he found a fresh batch of biscuits waiting beside his coffee cup before sunrise. No one else received the same treatment. There was no note, no explanation, just warm biscuits wrapped in a clean cloth. Cole looked toward the kitchen doorway. Ruby never turned around, but he caught the smallest pause in her movement before she continued kneading dough. That was enough. The silence between them wasn't rejection. It was fear. And he was beginning to understand the difference. 2 days later, Cole rode into town for supplies. The main street was muddy from melting snow. Wagons creaked past the general store. Smoke drifted from the chimney of Miller's Cafe. As Cole tied his horse outside the feed supply office, Deputy Samuel Reed stepped out from across the street. "You got a minute?" Cole nodded. The deputy lowered his voice. "Stranger's been asking questions." Cole felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of questions?" "About a woman." Samuel studied him carefully. "A ranch cook." The answer came too fast. "What's his name?" "Didn't give one." The deputy removed a folded receipt from his pocket. He paid cash at the hotel. The paper carried the signature from the guest ledger. Elias Crane. Probably fake. Men hiding something often traveled under borrowed names. Cole looked back toward the hotel porch. "What does he want?" Samuel shook his head. "That part worries me." The deputy hesitated. He wasn't asking like family looking for somebody. A cold feeling settled inside Cole. He was hunting. That evening, Cole stopped at Mrs. Eleanor Finch's house before returning home. The widow welcomed him inside with hot tea and a plate of apple cake. When he mentioned Ruby, the older woman's expression changed. Not surprise. Concern. "She's a good soul," Eleanor said quietly. "I know." "Then don't push her." Cole stared into his cup. "I wasn't planning to." Eleanor folded her hands. Sometimes people who carry heavy things aren't hiding from the law. She looked out the window. They're hiding from what the law failed to stop. The words stayed with him all the way home. That night, long after the ranch hands had gone to bed, Cole walked through the barn. A lantern glowed near the tack room. Ruby was there, repairing a torn saddle blanket. The old badge lay beside her. This time she didn't hide it. Cole stopped a few feet away. Neither spoke for a moment. Finally he asked, Who keeps looking for you? Ruby's hands became still. The silence stretched. Then she slowly picked up the badge. It belonged to someone who tried to do the right thing. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Cole waited. The lantern light flickered across the rough wooden walls. Years seemed to pass through her eyes. I worked for a freight company in Idaho. She looked down at the badge. Long time ago. The words came slowly, as if each one cost something. There was a young accountant. She swallowed. He kept records. Another pause. He found things he wasn't supposed to find. Cole felt his chest tighten. What happened? Ruby stared at the lantern flame. He disappeared. The answer hung in the air. Simple. Terrible. No details followed. None were needed. Outside, wind moved softly through the cottonwoods. Inside, the barn seemed smaller. Cole sat down on an overturned crate nearby. Not too close, not too far. And you know what happened? Ruby nodded once. The movement was almost invisible. I saw enough. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Cole asked the question that mattered. Did you do anything wrong? Ruby looked at him. Really looked at him. No. The answer came without hesitation. Not defensive. Not angry. Just true. Cole believed her immediately. More than that. He realized he had believed her from the beginning. Ruby looked away first. I should have left months ago, no. They won't stop looking, no. Her eyes met his again. This time there was frustration in them. You don't understand. Then help me understand. The words surprised even him. The barn grew quiet. Ruby's shoulders slowly lowered. Not surrender. Exhaustion. His name was Thomas Grayson. Cole frowned. The accountant? She nodded. He kept copies of records. Her fingers tightened around the badge. Payroll records. Another pause. Money disappeared. Cole already knew where the story was heading. The company blamed bookkeeping mistakes. Ruby nodded, but Thomas knew better. The lantern crackled softly. He planned to report everything. A long silence followed. Then Ruby whispered the rest. He never got the chance. The badge trembled slightly in her hand. For the first time since arriving at Cedar Bluff Ranch, Cole saw how tired she truly was. Not physically. The kind of tiredness that came from carrying years of fear. Years of looking over your shoulder. Years of never unpacking completely because you might have to leave tomorrow. Without thinking, Cole reached over and placed his hand gently on the saddle blanket between them. Not touching her. Just close enough. A simple gesture. An offer. Nothing more. Ruby looked down at it, then back at him. For a second, the distance between them disappeared. But reality returned quickly. Her gaze shifted toward the barn door, toward the darkness beyond, toward whatever was still coming. The next morning, before sunrise, Ruby stood alone outside the kitchen. The valley was covered in frost. The mountains glowed pale blue beneath the first light. She looked toward the main house, toward the barn, toward the ranch that had begun to feel dangerous for a reason she never wanted. Then she quietly returned inside, and for the first time in months, she began gathering the few belongings she could carry. Because deep down, she had already made a decision. If trouble came to Cedar Bluff Ranch because of her, she would leave before it arrived. Ruby waited 3 more days. 3 quiet days. 3 ordinary mornings where coffee steamed from tin cups and wagon wheels creaked through the yard. 3 days of watching Cole from a distance, The longer she stayed, the harder leaving became. That was exactly why she had to go. Before dawn on the fourth morning, the ranch was silent. Only the horses stirred inside the barn. Ruby folded her spare dress into a canvas satchel. She packed a comb, a blanket roll, a few dollars she had saved, and the old badge. Nothing more. She paused beside the kitchen stove. The room was dark. For months it had been hers. The flower shelf, the hanging cast-iron pans, the window above the sink where morning light always arrived first. She touched the edge of the work table one last time. Then she left. Outside, frost silvered the ground. Her horse waited near the back fence. Within minutes, she was riding north through the sleeping valley. By the time the sun rose over the mountains, Cedar Bluff Ranch was already behind her. Cole discovered she was gone shortly after breakfast. At first he thought she had gone into town. Then he noticed the empty hook where her coat usually hung, the missing horse, the untouched apron folded neatly beside the stove. A silence settled over the kitchen. Hank Doyle stood near the doorway. Neither man spoke. They didn't need to. Cole already knew. He walked outside. Fresh hoofprints led away from the ranch. North. Mrs. Eleanor Finch arrived that afternoon. One look at Cole's face told her everything. She left. Cole nodded. The older woman sighed. Some people leave before they can be left. Cole stared toward the distant mountains. I should have stopped her. No. Eleanor gently shook her head. You should have given her a reason to come back. The words followed him for the rest of the day. That night he barely slept. The next morning he saddled his horse before sunrise. Hank met him near the barn. You know where she's headed? No. You going anyway? Yes. Hank handed him a small leather pouch. Inside were supplies, matches, and a folded map. The older ranch hand nodded once. Then find her. Cole left Cedar Bluff Ranch beneath a gray winter sky. The search carried him north through narrow valleys and frozen creeks. At every stage stop, every trading post, every feed store, he asked the same question. Have you seen a woman traveling alone? Sometimes the answer was no. Sometimes someone remembered. A woman buying coffee. A woman purchasing oats. A woman riding through shortly before sunrise. Always a few hours ahead. Never close enough. 3 days passed. Then 4. Snow returned. The mountains grew colder. Near Red Canyon, Cole found proof he was still following the right trail. An old stable owner remembered her. Quiet woman. The man scratched his beard. Paid for feed. Didn't stay long. Which direction? The stable owner pointed east. Cole thanked him and rode on. That night, he slept inside an abandoned freight shelter beside an old wagon road. The roof leaked. The coffee tasted terrible, but sleep never came anyway. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ruby standing in the kitchen, or laughing quietly at something Hank had said, or sitting beside the fire during the storm. The memories hurt more than the cold. Meanwhile, another rider was also following Ruby's trail. Virgil Crow. The wealthy freight company owner had finally entered the search himself. His men spread across several towns, checking hotel ledgers, questioning stable hands, following old company contacts. The net was tightening. Ruby knew it. She could feel it. 2 days later, she reached a hunting cabin, hidden among pine-covered hills. The cabin had been abandoned for years. One broken window, a sagging porch, enough shelter for a single night. She built a small fire, warmed a can of beans, then sat alone beside the flames. For the first time since leaving Cedar Bluff Ranch, she allowed herself to cry. Only briefly. Quietly. No one saw. No one heard. By sunrise, she was gone again. Several hours later, coal arrived. The fire pit still held warm ashes. A tin cup sat beside the stones. She had been there. Recently, close enough to touch. Yet she was gone. Cole stood inside the empty cabin. The silence felt enormous. Outside, wind moved through the trees. Inside, everything she had left behind seemed to linger. The folded blanket, a coffee stain near the hearth, a loose strand of dark thread caught on a nail. Small things, enough to make the absence hurt. For the first time during the search, doubt crept in. Maybe she didn't want to be found. Maybe leaving had been her choice all along. The realization struck harder than any storm. As evening approached, Cole stepped back onto the porch. The mountains stretched endlessly beneath a sky turning purple with dusk. Then he noticed something. Fresh wagon tracks. Not hers. Too large. Too recent. Several horses. Moving east. Toward the abandoned silver mining settlements near Blackstone Ridge. A bad feeling settled deep in his chest. The next morning confirmed it. At a supply store along the Ridge Road, a merchant recognized a sketch of Virgil Crowe. Passed through yesterday. The merchant pointed toward the old mining country. He wasn't alone. Cole's stomach tightened. That afternoon, he finally learned the truth he had been refusing to see. Ruby hadn't been kidnapped. She hadn't been forced. She had left willingly. To protect Cedar Bluff Ranch. To protect him. The realization followed him through every mile that remained. And by sunset on the following day, as cold wind swept across the empty remains of an abandoned silver town, Cole finally saw her. A single figure walking between weathered buildings. Ruby, alive, safe. For one brief second, relief flooded through him. Then another rider emerged from the far end of town. Virgil Crowe. And suddenly Cole understood. He was not the only one who had found her. The abandoned mining town sat beneath a steel-gray sky. Years earlier, hundreds of men had chased silver through these hills. Now only empty buildings remained. Broken windows, weather-beaten storefronts, a church with no bell. The wind moved freely through the deserted streets. Cole stayed hidden behind an old feed warehouse and watched. Ruby stood near the remains of the town's general store. Her coat whipped in the cold wind. Across the street, Virgil Crowe slowly dismounted from his horse. Even from a distance, there was something calm about him that felt dangerous. Not the confidence of a good man. The confidence of someone who believed money could solve any problem. Ruby didn't move. Neither did Crowe. For several long moments, the town remained silent. Then Crowe stepped forward. Cole couldn't hear every word, only fragments carried by the wind. "You've carried them long enough." Ruby said something in return. Crowe extended one hand, waiting, demanding. Ruby shook her head. Once. Firmly. Crowe's expression hardened. The wind rattled a loose sign above the street. Cole knew he couldn't stay hidden much longer. Then another sound echoed through town. Horse hooves. Several riders. Crowe turned. So did Ruby. Deputy Samuel Reed appeared at the far end of the street with two local lawmen beside him. Their horses slowed as they entered town. Samuel's eyes immediately found Cole. A slight nod passed between them. Everything was ready. The deputy dismounted and approached. Virgil Crowe. The businessman forced a smile. "Deputy." Samuel removed several folded papers from his saddlebag. Payroll records, shipping receipts, company ledgers, documents collected over weeks of investigation. Documents Cole had helped track down across 3 counties. Crowe's smile faded. The deputy held up the papers. "We have statements from former employees. More riders entered town behind him. Several older freight workers, men who had once worked for Crow's company, men who had spent years wondering where their missing wages had gone. The truth was finally standing in daylight. No one shouted. No one needed to. Crow looked around and understood. The game was over. His shoulders lowered slightly. For the first time, he looked older. The deputy stepped forward. "You're coming with us." Crow glanced once toward Ruby. Not angry, not threatening, almost disappointed. Then he quietly surrendered. The moment felt strangely small after years of fear. No dramatic confrontation, no gunfire. Just the slow collapse of a lie that had lasted too long. Within minutes, the riders began leaving town. Crow rode away between the deputies. The old freight workers followed. Soon, only 3 people remained: Cole, Ruby, and the winter wind. Neither spoke at first. The silence felt different now. Lighter, yet somehow harder. Because there was no danger left to distract them. Only the truth. Ruby stared toward the mountains. "It's over." "Yes." She nodded slowly, then looked down at the ground. "I never thought I'd see this day." Cole stepped closer. Not enough to crowd her. Just enough so she wouldn't feel alone. "You don't have to run anymore." The words hung in the cold air. Ruby's eyes glistened. For a moment, she seemed unable to answer. Then she gave the smallest nod. A week later, they returned to Cedar Bluff Ranch. Snow still covered parts of the valley, but winter was already weakening. The ranch hands welcomed Ruby back without questions. Hank simply took her bag from the wagon and carried it inside. Mrs. Eleanor Finch arrived the next afternoon with 2 fresh pies. No one made a speech. No one needed to. Home announced itself through small things: a warm stove, a familiar chair, coffee waiting in the morning. Life slowly settled back into place. Then one evening, several days after their return, Cole found Ruby sitting alone on the porch. The sunset painted the foothills gold. He carried a weathered envelope in one hand. "I found something." Ruby looked up. Carefully, he handed it to her. The paper was old. The writing faded. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The signature at the bottom stopped her breath. Thomas Grayson, the young accountant, the man who never got the chance to tell his story. Ruby read quietly. The letter wasn't long, just a few paragraphs, simple words written years ago. "If the truth ever comes out, stop running. You deserve more than survival. Find a place to live, not a place to hide." By the time she reached the final line, tears rested silently on her cheeks. Neither of them spoke for a while. The sun disappeared behind the mountains. Darkness slowly settled across the ranch. Spring arrived early the following year. Snow melted from the hillsides. Wildflowers returned to the valley, and smoke once again drifted from the kitchen chimney every morning. One afternoon, Cole asked Ruby to meet him inside the ranch office. She expected paperwork, supply orders, feed invoices. Instead, he handed her a document. Ruby unfolded it. Her eyes widened. Part ownership of Cedar Bluff Ranch, legally recorded, signed, witnessed, real. She looked up immediately. "Cole, you built this place back into a home." His voice remained calm. "You belong here." Ruby stared at the papers. Not a gift, not charity, not rescue, respect, partnership. A place beside him, not behind him. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Ruby folded the document carefully, set it on the desk, stepped forward, and kissed him. This time there was no storm outside, no fear, no goodbye waiting around the corner. only certainty. When they finally stepped apart, both of them were smiling. Months later, on a bright spring morning, the ranch woke before sunrise. Workers crossed the yard, horses waited near the corrals, coffee brewed inside the kitchen. Smoke curled upward from the chimney and drifted into the Montana sky. Ruby stood in the doorway, watching the day begin. Not as a hired cook, not as someone passing through, not as a woman preparing to leave. She was home, and for the first time in many years, she knew she was staying. As the morning sun climbed over the Montana hills, the smoke from Cedar Bluff Ranch drifted into the clear spring sky. Horses moved slowly across the pasture. Coffee warmed on the stove. Somewhere beyond the barn, laughter carried on the breeze. And maybe that's what makes a place feel like home. Not the land, not the buildings, not even the years you've spent there. It's the moment you stop looking over your shoulder. It's the moment you realize you no longer have to run. If you were standing where Ruby stood that morning, after years of fear, after years of carrying memories too heavy to set down, would you have found the courage to stay? Would you have trusted that a new chapter was possible? Because sometimes the greatest act of bravery isn't crossing mountains or facing danger. Sometimes it's allowing yourself to believe that you deserve peace. Cole couldn't erase Ruby's past. He couldn't undo the losses or the years she spent hiding. What he offered was something quieter, a place beside him, a reason to believe that tomorrow could be different from yesterday. And maybe that's the lesson hidden inside stories like this one. The right people don't ask us to become someone else. They help us become ourselves again. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What moment stayed with you the most? And if you'd like to spend more evenings beside campfires, dusty trails, forgotten secrets, and stories about love, healing, and second chances in the American West, I hope you'll join us again. There are still many journeys waiting just beyond the next horizon.